Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Sean Allen. I'm an interpreter here at the Whale Museum. Welcome, and thank you for joining us for this part of our program, Food for Thought, brought to you by MS Worthington Foundation. Today's lecture features Peter Brace, over here, author of Nantucket, A Natural History, and Walking Nantucket. Peter Brace has lived on Nantucket for 23 years, writing for the Nantucket Beacon and the Nantucket Independent as the environmental reporter. Currently working on a second volume of blogs, Peter also guides the natural history hikes on island conservation. So let's give Peter a hand. Welcome to the floor,
Peter. Okay, can you guys hear me? Yes. Hear me okay? Yeah. Okay, when they asked me to do this, they didn't come up with a topic. I just decided, they said, you can talk about whatever you want, because I really couldn't think of anything else. And I thought that coastal erosion, the sea level rise, is on everyone's mind because of the winter we've had. I don't know how long everybody in this room has lived here, but I'm betting that there are some people that have lived here longer than I have, and then we might have some newbies, and then we might have some visitors. It's been my experience that we seem to have short-term memory here when it comes to storms and erosion. People seeing the water downtown and going, oh my God, I've never seen it so bad, and oh, this is terrible. And well, we've been getting that and the erosion on the island since the island became an island about 6,000 years ago. If you were wondering why I chose this photo for my opening shot, I think it's a sort of an iconic Nantucket picture. You have the South Shore, you have waves breaking right up onto the beach, and then you have a salt box house. And the salt box house is up on blocks and being moved. Okay. All right. I'm doing it. Okay. So I'm going to give a little bit of a geology refresher, which will be old news to some people and brand new to others, to the best of my abilities. Nantucket came into being during the Pleistocene epoch, during what's known as the Wisconsin glacial stage. And that is a glacier that began way up in Canada and eventually covered sort of the top northern 1/3 of the US. You can see this dark line here is the extent of the glacier. It started making its way down to Nantucket about 24,000 years ago from the Gulf of St. Lawrence, working down to the coast, finally stopping at about maybe 21,000 years ago. This isn't the greatest map, and I'll have another map to show you that shows in finer detail the three different lobes that affected our area. But it was known as the Laurentide ice sheet. It was the last continental ice sheet to cover the northern hemisphere. Okay, there's a International Space Station photo of us. Okay, so when the glacier came down into our area, at that time, and they have Nantucket and Martha's Vineyard to show where they would exist, but all of this land here is the continental shelf. It was at that time a coastal plain, meaning it was dry. It was, I believe, a savanna, a grassland, and the glacier pushed material ahead of it down over onto this area. Here's another representation that shows basically the whole eastern seaboard. This whole area, all this light blue here, was all dry land when the glacier came down. Here's the map I'm telling you about. At the very edges of the glacier, you can sort of segment it up into lobes. And so there were two main lobes of ice that affected Nantucket, the Cape Cod Bay lobe and the South Channel lobe. You see this line here, this blue line. This is what's known as the terminal moraine. the terminal moraine, terminal meaning end, obviously, and moraine is the end of the glacial debris. This map was created by a guy named Robert Odale. He wrote a book called Cape Cod, Martha's Vineyard, Nantucket, a geologic story. He was a geologist with the U.S. Geological Survey in Falmouth his entire life, and he created this map so you could understand where the ice was. They put the landforms here to show you where they would exist once the glacier pulled back. So is anybody out here, anybody in the audience, have you hiked in the moors at all? Yes? And you've seen the hills. Maybe you've been to Shawcamo Hills. Maybe you've seen the real up and down all over out there. That is the terminal moraine. That is the glacier pushing material up into a pile of rubble. It did retreat and then come back a bit. Then you also had water flowing off the glacier, and the water sculpted those hills out there. And then you've all been to the south shore of the island, I'm guessing. The south shore of the island is pretty flat. The south shore of the island is an outwash plain, and what that means is that the water from the glacier flowed off, spread out in the deltas going to maybe 75 miles offshore, out over the edge of the continental shelf and down into the ocean, smoothing out the island south of the glacier. And so when I wrote Nantucket, A Natural History, I did look at several geologists. The two that I spent a lot of time looking at were Mr. Odale and then this guy Nathaniel Schaller, who did a geological survey of Nantucket. I think it was 1889. And not having all the instruments that geologists have today, he theorized that that the glacier stopped along this line here, this line here. So all this pink is moraine. This is all the hills that I was talking about, and then all the yellow being outwash. Odale didn't believe that. This is his geological map. If you ever want to really know the soils and the sediments of Nantucket, I would get this map. You can get it at Mariah Mitchell Association. It's a huge thing. And each one of these colors, you can't see the key here, but each one of these colors of sediments has a description of what it is. So Odale is saying that the terminal moraine was basically here in this part of the island. Maybe there's a little bit there. And that these, it kind of shows it right here, down here. The glacier on the island stopped here, but then, according to Odale, went about 20 miles south of where the island would exist and then pulled back. So you get these outwash plains, this one, and then this being the Sconset outwash plain, the youngest, of water flowing off of the glacier. And then this material up here, this pinkish material, is represented to be clay, and it was during a period of time about maybe 20,000 to 19,000 years ago. There was a glacial lake called Glacial Lake Sakacha, and Glacial Lake is sort of a cove in the edge of the ice with ice on three sides, and then a dam of moraine, glacial till material at the end of it. And so if you've ever walked from here, it's a great walk now, there's nobody here. From Pocomo Point to Walwinnet, there's an awful lot of clay in these bluffs, you can see, and then there's a lot of clay in the banks right there with the boat racks in Pulpus Harbor. So what happened was the lake existed for 1,000 years or so, and the materials that are flowing into it off of the glacier fill up, basically go into the lake and then pile up at the bottom, and we've got a lot of clay sediments there. There's also a lot of clay sediments here in Sankaty Bluff. Okay. I have a soil profile for you here. This is the South Shore. And if you've walked on the South Shore, you've probably seen something like this. Newly eroded, you can go there any day and see newly eroded shoreline and get a great representation of the soil. Up at the top, you have the dark dirt, loomy soil that you'd want to plant things in. You've got American beach grass growing out of it, and then a little bit lower, the dirt is kind of mixing with sand, and then there's some gravel here, and then just straight sand here. I mean, we're about 1,500 feet of sand and gravel and rocks and clay sitting on bedrock. So, all right. I'm building up to erosion. So I recently wrote an article for Nantucket Magazine and learned this information. Steamboat Wharf's tide gauge data reveals long-term average sea level rise around Nantucket is 3.6 millimeters annually. From 1965 to 1999, it averaged 2.9 millimeters, and it doubled 2000 to 2017 to 6.8 millimeters. And the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change predicts the Northeast is likely to experience more rapid sea level rise than much of the coastal areas on our planet, predominantly due to the weakening Gulf Stream. And so what I've read on that is, well, if you know anything about the Gulf Stream, which is maybe 200 to 300 miles southeast of here, it's a warm current of water coming up from the tip of Florida. And normally it moves along at whatever speed it moves along, heading up and then over to Europe. And but if that slows, and as some of you may know, water when it is heated expands, which means it'll rise. If the Gulf Stream slows and that warm water comes into our area, that's going to expand our water and make it rise. That's the best I can do. And I read an article on Weather Underground where a meteorologist explained it better. I have 45 minutes to talk to you, and I don't have enough time to explain how it works. But if you see me afterwards, I can give you my card, and I'll give you a link to the article. Okay, so right now the town is working on a coastal resiliency plan to long-term protect the island from sea level rise. They also at the same time are developing what's known as a hazard mitigation plan. The two are going to work together. The hazard mitigation is sort of to, what do we do if this happens? Okay, then here are the processes and the laws and the regulations that come right in and will help solve that problem immediately if this building gets flooded or this street gets flooded. The coastal resiliency plan is a long-term plan to plan for the water rising up. And I'm really glad that the town is doing this because since I've been covering the environment out here, since I've been writing about erosion and sea level rise and everything that's outdoors on Nantucket, I get to see a lot, to get to go to a lot of the storms, and I go to pond openings whenever I can, and I saw the pond the water flowing out of my Comet Pond yesterday. I hope to see Sakatcha and Hummock. And so naturally I'm in touch with a lot of people that are much smarter than I am that know about all this. And so I've formed my own opinions on what's going to happen in Nantucket. Some of you may remember a guy named Wes Tiffany. He helped found the UMass field station. He was a botanist by training, but he dabbled a lot in coastal erosion, and you may have heard that his prediction for Nantucket's life expectancy was about 400 years. I think it's going to last longer than that, honestly. I mean, the island became an island. It became an island, this part here, at 6,000 years ago. Because when the glacier was pulling back, when it stopped and started to pull back, it took from then to 6,000 years ago, 15,000 years for the water to come up about 300, depending who you talk to, 300 to 400 feet. So if you consider that, maybe it's not going to happen as quickly. However, we have things that are sort of working against us. These ponds here, this pond here, Hummock Pond, you can see it looks like a kind of a hook. It used to go down and come up like that, but the blizzard of '78 pushed sand into right here and made Clark Cove its own pond. Then you have Long Pond here, you have Myacomet here. In between Myacomet and Hummock, you have Myoxy's Pond right there, and then after Myacomet, there's the Wee Weeders Ponds. There's Nobodier Valley in there. Then you have Matacasham. Forked Pond, Toop Shoe, those valleys. And then you have Tom Nevers Pond. All of these were major tributaries of water coming off the glacier and going out to the edge of the continental shelf. And I think eventually, my theory is that that'll be our undoing. I think eventually water will flow up into those areas. You could see almost Hummock Pond could cut the island in half, because then you go up to Maxey's Pond and Washing Pond and Capon Pond right there. That could cut us off. We know about the Chris Emery's house, which now has been removed and the creek has been filled in. It probably won't be long before the Smiths Point neighborhood will be cut off. This pond right here, Maya Comet, as you know, it's been opened. When you're driving on Surfside Road and you're headed out toward the beach and you go past Maya Comet Ave, slow down just past where the bike rental place is and Yummy is, and look on either side and look down and see how deep that valley is. When they built that road, they had to build it way up because the depth, the water area of Maya Comet Pond continues way, way up behind Stop and Shop and goes almost to the creeks. So this could be another place where the water could come in. And then you have, well, we'll get to that. Well, I could spend all day on that map. Okay. So this is about, thanks to the Nantucket Historical Association for getting me these photos. I think this is around 1870, maybe a little earlier. It's from the Unitarian Church. Looking down, there's the hub, there's the Athenaeum. I believe this would be, I think this would be Steamboat Wharf. But all this up here is not Code 2, this is Brant Point. Notice that it's beach and marsh and tideland. What you have to know is that the lower part of downtown Nantucket is all built on salt marsh. It's all built on filled tideland. Union Street was built in 1730. They had to dig into the bank, which was called Quantity Bank, or Bluff, to a dry enough place where they put the road. They took all the fill and put that between there and where Washington Street would exist. They had to fill all this in. Right in here, roughly, is where the White Elephant Hotel is. Right there with my very unsteady hand is moving the dot around is where, if you go past the White Elephant, you get to this little marshy area. Shellfish Hatchery is here. The lighthouse is here. You can see a better. It's been filled in here. Here's the lighthouse, and then there's the Nantucket Hotel there, and there's some houses. There's a steamer coming in. So it started to fill in. But every time we get a storm, you know, those lowlands fill up with water. During the 1991, during the no-name storm, which became to be known as the perfect storm, the former chief of our fire department, he went around in a boat with other people in boats, driving it all around the neighborhoods in Brant Point, rescuing people. And in the process of trying to rescue people, their boat went over a Volkswagen Bug that was underwater. The motor scraped over the top of it. And I know there was a lot of water downtown this year with our storms, but it's nothing like that storm was. That storm was something else. Okay, so this is Code 2. And why I'm showing you this is that if you go to any one of the bends in Code 2, most of them have little inlets that go back into the brush. And why I'm showing you this is all of this here is cedar. And the cedar is all dead now because the water is coming up higher and killing it. That, yeah, there. This, in certain places around the island on the shore, you'll see this really dark, dense, almost looks like pavement, very peaty material. You can see little roots in it. It's what some Nantucketers call hardpan. And this is in front of Long Pond, where it comes out, the southern end of Long Pond, right? This is a storm. I think it was a hurricane or a nor'easter. in 2010. And the beach was so worn down that you could see this hard pan. Well, this is bottom of the pond, bottom of course, the ponds, they extended, or that outwash valleys extended further out than exist now, because the water, around 6,000 years ago came up and dammed everything up. So this shows just that hard pan. This is the erosion doing that. Hard pan is what people call it out here. I don't know the origin of that. Yeah, it looks really, really, really dark. It's dirt with roots in it. It's compressed pond bottom. These last few storms we have, there's lots of places you can go and see it. This is just 2 days ago. This is on Great Point. This is one of the two blowouts that have really widened. I did a pano with my iPhone, so it looks wider than it is, but it's about 150 feet from here, the ocean, over to Nantucket Sound. Let's show another angle of it. Yeah, so back there is where I was standing, right there. And this is the dune, how far it's been narrowed down. It's just amazing how the distance, it's amazing. And I know that the trustees of reservations, people tell me that it has washed over quite a bit during the storms that we've had. Yeah, that's the gulls. Yep, this here, one of my favorite places. This is Cascada Pond right here, the glades beyond it, and here's the ocean. There used to be a tall, healthy dune right here that you had to hike over to get to. Now this is what you have. It's almost flat. I'd say it's less than 100 feet from here to there. The inside road that you would take to go past the Cascada Woods, which is down here, is totally gone. The ocean, back in this direction, is coming up right to the woods. It's amazing how much has gone. And you think that, that's it, another winter and it's going to be gone. But when I get to erosion, I'll show you how it's going to take a little bit longer than we think. And then this is Long Pond right here. And it was taken the same day I took those pictures of hard pan. And here it is washing up. Well, it was washing up into the pond. So another place that it could connect. And again, erosion and sea level rise, they're connected. Inextricably connected. The water comes up and you still have these stronger storms. So the water is going to be, the higher it gets, the more it's going to be able to get to. And something that dawned on me is when I became a reporter and covered erosion out here and storms, which may be blatantly obvious, but no one cares about erosion until there's some sort of asset in the way. Someone's house, a road, a beach that you go to that disappears. And you walk along a shoreline with no features on it, with no infrastructure, with no nothing. As soon as the ocean is approaching a house, then it becomes a crisis. And oh my God, we got to stop this. And yeah, just try that. This was about a week ago. We're sort of drowning on both sides. This is Squam Pond. This little house right here is next to a public way that goes down to the beach. This is Conservation Foundation property. And then right here is the road. And this post has a post that is matches the post on the other side of the road. And a guy who lives at, I think it's 46 Squam Road. He's a summer resident. His name is Tony Cahill. Last year, the pond was so full that the road was closed for about 6 weeks. And so Tony, with the Quidnet Squam Association, raised the road in hopes that it would never flood. And they put a post, and then there's a couple of little eyelets, and you could put a chain over it. And well, this year it flooded. Pretty crazy how far it came up. This is during Winter Storm Riley. This is Pulpus Road at Sacajah Pond, and the pond didn't breach, but the water is so high because of all the rain. Of course, with climate change, global warming, we've had all this rain, But normally we get an inch of rain. If that was a snowstorm, an inch of rain equals 10 inches of snow. And if the ground stays frozen enough, then the snow doesn't melt to the end, or it's a slow trickle. We've had all our snowstorms in the form of rain, and that rain has gone into all of our into our groundwater and brought it up. So just on the other side of the road here is this big marsh. That marsh is full, and then out at the place where they open the pond east of here during storms, water is just easily washing over every time. But you couldn't even stand. You were just getting pelted. It wasn't even raining, and the wind that was blowing over the road. I mean, up here it's all open up. The town is trying to figure out a way how they're going to close that up. I think they're going to wait till they drain the pond so they can really work in there and maybe put some sort of bulkhead there, but for now it's closed. This is from a storm in 2010. This is Old North Wharf over here, Steamboat Wharf. This is more of me just trying to say that, we've had a lot of storms that are worse than we had this year. These are the finger piers, totally covered up. Here, Easy Street, before the new raising of the bulkhead. This is yesterday, Comet Pond. Here's the cut that somebody dug illegally. And we all know this, right? Most of it's been out to see it. If you haven't, this was I touched something. Okay. This is a guy named Chris Emery for the longest time, probably maybe 20 or 30 years. He's owned this little house on stilts. And this is Nantucket. This white railing leads to a bridge called Millie's Bridge. And up until, when did this happen? Like January, when we had our storm. Grayson, I think is what they called it. We had a storm that filled. This was a creek. The water went all the way up to here pretty much. There was a dune with grass, and the sand was pushed in and filled this in. This was an actual little pier, and somebody had boats off of the house that's right here. Let me give you another shot here. There's a wide-angle shot showing it. Here's the creek. Here's the bridge. Here's his house. The house has since been moved. And then this is Smith's Point. Esther's Island is here. This is what's known as, this day was the Patriots' Day storm of 2007. I think it says on Weather Underground that it was a nor'easter, but I swear to God it was a sou'easter, the way the winds are blowing, because when we get a nor'easter, usually the winds are blowing out over the ocean, and the waves were huge coming onto the shore, and I'm standing on a dune at that time working for the Nantucket Independent, taking photos, and I was there at the moment when it broke through. It's broken through a lot of times before. Esther's Island got the name Esther's Island from a Hurricane Esther in September 1961. It stayed open until probably Hurricane Gloria, which was 1985 or 1986. And so it stayed open long enough for the island to exist as an island. So now everybody says, where are you? Well, I'm on Esther's Island. But you're actually on Smith's Point, which goes all the way out, but you're also on Esther's Island. The way I think about it, anyway. And then this was a nicer day, and the beach had grown. Here's Esther's Island, here's Smith's Point. Boats were going through here for the 2 years it was open. It closed in October 2009. Okay, erosion. So, at the end, I'm going to show you a bunch of great books that you can check out that'll, if you're really interested in erosion and everything I'm talking about, help you understand it better. Okay, so this is from a book. It's a Nantucket Shoreline Survey from 1847 to 1971, I think, that Conservation Foundation and a few other organizations put together. It's looking kind of technical here, I know, but it's just showing waves breaking on the beach. We all know how that works. What's important is this diagram here. The waves aren't actually directly breaking on the beach. They're breaking on the beach at an angle. And as they break at a beach on the angle, either this way or that way, and either really severe or not so, they're sort of raking the sand along and creating what's known as littoral drift. And not literal like literally, but littoral meaning the litter, the material that's moved along, and the sand is just sent along the beach. So it's not like you're taking a bunch of sand here and bringing it over here and dropping it. It's like if you took a shovel full of sand and spread it like that, and it spreads along, eventually building up. So when we were back looking at the slide for Long Pond and Cascada Pond, and I was saying, yeah, the water's coming up and it won't be long now and the pond will fill up. But the thing is, sand is constantly being moved around all around the island. I think, let's see, yes, okay. So this is in the same book. This is the direction that these guys say that sediments are moved by littoral drift all around the island. So here, north to south, going up the beach. Actually, right around Baxter Road, it splits and it's now coming down this way. But the South Shore, it's generally east to west. From Great Point, it's around Great Point and down Coatue, and it's kind of split there. But the sand is constantly being moved. So if that wasn't happening, if there was no erosion, then the sea level rise, I don't know, maybe it would take the island sooner because sand wouldn't be coming and rescuing the places that needed it the most. So if you've ever been to a pond opening, you can see the sand coming out of the pond, and the water is all brownish, and you get the current moving it. And so the beach south of the pond, here's Maya Comet. So now that the water is flowing out of there, there's going to be a lot of sand that's going to move down here and build this up. You're going to see a huge buildup of sand. Same thing when we open up Hummock Pond. Okay. All right. We've all heard of the Haulover? Yes? If you haven't heard of the Haulover, it's out on, go back. Here's Walwinnet right here. And this little narrow spot right there is called the Haulover. And they called it the Haulover because cod fishermen, without the power of engines, instead of rowing all the way out and around Great Point to get out to where they're going to fish, much easier for them to keep boats here or keep boats in the harbor and then row up harbor and then drag their boats, haul them over the dunes into the ocean and then go out and do their business and come back. In the process of doing that, they, with their dories, gouged a trench over the dunes. Then there was a storm in December of 1896, and the storm found the easiest way it could go, went right through that channel and opened up the Haulover. And for 12 years, this cut was open. And because of littoral drift, because of the movement of sand, we'll go back here and I'll show you, I wish I had the other map to show you, but when Nantucket was created at 6,000 years ago, you just had this part here. Coatue, Great Point, Cascada, the Haulover, Eel Point, Smith's Point didn't exist. All of that was post-glacial deposits. So that meaning sand, sediments, whatever, gravel that was deposited by the ocean after the island became an island, moved around by currents. This part of the island maybe happened in the last 2,000 to 3,000 years because sand being brought up from this part of the island going up over, this thing is a pain in the ass. Basically sand grew a point here which came out to Cascada, Mr. O'Dale says that Cascada was its own little island of gravel and clay and hard soils. And so the sand connected with that, starting the formation of our harbor. It eventually went out and created Grant Point, and a current was then created that carried sand down and over time created CO2. Okay. So with that littoral sand movement process in mind, while when it down here, this cut opens up. What's happening is that this point here, this side, the north side is eroding, heading north. This side here is building because the sand moves from the south to the north. And the rate of erosion was probably just a little bit ahead of the rate of growth. So this opening stayed for 12 years until it finally joined with Cascada in 1908, forming, which if you've ever walked out there, before you get to Cascada, there's a little tidal pond called Hollover Pond. And that pond was formed by the joining of the south part of that Hollover with Cascada again. Okay, yeah, unfortunately it's not going to show up great, but this is a map that my good friend Jim Lentowski, the executive director of the Nantucket Conservation Foundation, put together. It's erosion, it's a shoreline change 1844 to 2014. I don't know if you can see it, but there's a red line, let's see. The red line, which is like the earliest one, it's 1844 to 1967. It shows, let's see, what does it say? 1897. At one point, Smith's Point here was further out and continued all the way up, almost wrapping around Muskegon Island, and was attached at a certain time to Tuckernuck, attached enough so that cattle farmers would herd their animals out at low tide and leave them on Tuckernuck for a period of time and then bring them back. Yeah, the colored lines really don't show up enough. I apologize for that. But maybe, let's see if I've got this one shows it a little bit better. You can see here Smith's Point right here. And then there were these islands that were in between that later formed called the Gravelly Islands that no longer exist. Okay. All right, I got this photo from a friend of mine. He's a charter pilot named George Reithoff. This is shortly after, just right around the time that this part of Smith's Point rejoined with Smith's Point with Esther Island in October of 2009. But just think about the sand being moved down the beach. Just think about the volume of sand having to come down the island and build this up and reconnect it. It's just amazing. I always thought that if I had the patience to go to school and become a geologist, that it would want to be a coastal geologist, because coastal geologists get to go and actually see the processes happening. People studying the rocks are looking at radioactive isotopes and sections and trying to guess how it is. And I know it's more exact than I just explained it, but it would seem to me more satisfying. Maybe you'd want to be someone who studied volcanoes or something, because at least you'd get to see the rock being moved around. But here, you know, in Nantucket, you can take a walk on this beach today and then go back next week and see how it's different. I just personally find it fascinating. It's how I became the person that I am on Nantucket. I love being outdoors. I walk every day with my dog. I'm walking in a different place every time. I'm fascinated to see what I'm going to see both in the woods and along the shoreline. It's just an amazing place to live. Okay, this is another photo from our series of photos from my friend George. 2007, here's Tuckernuck. This point here is called Bigelow Point. 2 years later, here it is. And here's 2012. It's growing out, and Muskegon is down here somewhere. So, and I know he's taken a long view here, and it looks a little bit longer than it is, but still, it's amazing how much sand moves. It's an effort for me to exhibit how longshore current works, how littoral drift works. Okay, let's see. This was a perk the other day when I got to go out on the Great Point with the trustees of the reservations. They took me up into the lighthouse and got to go out on a little parapet. And we're looking back. Here's the lagoon on Great Point. Here's the galls, really narrow back here. This is the ocean. It's still, even though I use the wide angle on my iPhone, still extremely wide here. Still lots and lots of dune left. So I really think that even though you have erosion, and the most extreme erosion is obviously in the storms that we have, even though you have erosion, you still have sand being brought up, being shifted all around the island, building the beaches up. It's going to take some pretty extreme events for us to disappear. But I do think that, you know, at least within our lifetimes, I think eventually Great Point becomes an island. Erosion is going to exacerbate that, but sea level rise is going to make it so that the water is going to be able to wash over a lot more frequently, and be able to open that up more and erode it away, so that then there will be an open channel between there. This is Sheep Pond Road. I don't know if anybody knows where this is, but all the houses are back in this direction. That's looking east. There used to be a little parking area right there. Just beyond here is Sheep Pond, but there was a little parking area right there. You could come in and pull in and go to the beach. It's all gone. This is the next road to be exposed, to be in peril. And this was this winter. This is Sankaty. The benefit of being tall, I can put my arm on one of those posts and look down when nobody else can. Here is the lighthouse. This is Sakacha Pond. This is the village of Quidnet just here on the horizon, and then the beach here, and this is a particularly stormy day. And as some of you may know, the lighthouse was moved in 2007 in September. It was moved about, I'd say, 400 some odd feet northwest, and then 250 feet in from the edge. At the time, it was at 76 feet from the edge of the bluff. And the company that moves large structures like that, they moved the lighthouse on Martha's Vineyard at Aquina. They moved the Nauset Light. They moved the lighthouse on Block Island, and the Hatteras Light called International Chimney. They said you need to move it now because there has to be a minimum distance between the lighthouse, between the structure that they're moving and the shore, otherwise the ground isn't stable enough. And so we were at 76 feet. They said at 60 feet we won't be able to do it, so you better, get us to do it. Okay, this is sort of a cross section, a cutout from that big map I showed you with the lines that wouldn't show up that Jim Lintowski sent me. And this is a land court plan that started in 1929. The red line right here is where the shoreline was. Here's Hummock Pond here. Here's Clark Cove. Bear in mind that this came down and connected. So it was much further. So if you go to the end of Hummock Pond Road, when I got here in 1992 to work for the Nantucket Beacon, you could go down to the end of Hummock Pond Road and take a right and go down, and there was a whole row of houses down there. They no longer exist. Conservation Foundation says that the shoreline, the South Shore, can erode on average 12 to 15 feet, I think. But back on toward Smith's Point, in that neighborhood, as much as 30 to 50 feet a year, according to some residents. A friend of mine who works for the town, a guy named Tom Erickson, he owned a house on Rhode Island Ave, which is, if you, on your way to Smith's Point, you go across Millie's Bridge, go through the pines and take the turn, and you're going straight. Instead of going right to Massachusetts Ave, you go straight. He moved his house twice, ran out of room, eventually moved his house to Tacoma Way. And Tom had said that prior to 2005, the erosion wasn't that bad out there, because out offshore, maybe 500-600 feet, was a shoal that acted as a break of the waves that were coming in. And in 2005, there was a ferocious storm, and that storm took that shoal. And ever since then, the erosion has been just horrific there. That's that's not a coastal geologist saying that, but that's somebody who had lived there for years and years and years. And so I think that us observers, us naturalists, are just as good as the people who write it down in books, because you're seeing it every day. You may not be able to explain the technical, but you saw it with your eyes. Okay. When I first got to Nantucket, I worked for the Nantucket Beacon. We were an upstart, underdog little paper taking on the bigger paper, and got there in February of '92. In December of '92, we had a nor'easter, and the houses, four or five of the houses that were on the ocean side of Codfish Park Road went into the water. And I hesitate to say this because it's trite, but people who have only been living here for 10 or 15 years think they've seen storms here. You haven't seen a storm until you've seen the storms that we had in the early 90s. It's when the erosion, I believe it's when the rip off of Sconset shifted a bit. It's when we had, 20, 30-foot waves breaking on the beach. It's when erosion really accelerated out in Sconset. It was the motivation for a group of Baxter Road residents to form the Sconset Beach Preservation Fund, to do something to try and armor their beaches, something to save their properties. But before that happened, those guys formed in November of '93. They were losing houses in Codfish Park, and this is, the road's just right there. This is the ocean coming right up on and picking apart this house. This is my friend, correct me if I'm wrong, Rob, this is DeWitt's house, right? You called it window box, right? Oh, okay. Well, right in this area was a house called Sandpiper, and it was one house in front of the other. One was closer to the road, the other was sort of on the beach and had dunes in front of it before. It was owned by a friend of ours who worked at the paper with us, a woman named DeWitt Smith. And we all watched as the ocean came and took that house, and the whole house floated out onto the waves, and the waves pulverized it within about 5-6 minutes, and it was gone. I mean, it was just, it's nothing like I've ever seen. Nothing like the storms we had this winter. They don't compare. Now there's no houses on that side. Yeah, I mean, look at those waves. That is my friend DeWitt's garage after the house is gone, which was right here. I had a video I wanted to show you, but my equipment failed me. So, and then this was a house owned by Donald Hollings. It was the last house to survive on the ocean side of Codfish Park Road. They had to build it to code for the floodplain on stilts. Before all these storms happened, you wouldn't have seen any of these posts. They were all in the beach. And it was leaning. You can kind of see it if you were looking down the beach. You can see how the whole house was moving. I think they moved it in 1995. They had to take the Gully Road Beach bridge out to move it. And I think they moved it Sleet Wing Circle, I think. Okay. This is 2000, I want to say this is 2008 or no, this is 2009. This is the year of the Patriots Day storm. And this is Sheep Pond Road, and we had severe erosion, and the house just slid right off. And this, I believe, is 2010. These houses belong to a guy named Charlie Warner. He was sort of right at a bend in the road on Sheep Pond Road. The house that I just showed you was beyond these houses. He had gotten permission to put these giant neoprene bags in front of his house. The storm, I guess their waves didn't care about it that much. Okay. And then I wanted to show you some of the things that I see when I'm out there. After the storms had abated, after Riley had abated, I went out to Hoyks Hollow Road, which is on Pulpus Road. It's where the Sankaty Head Beach Club is. It's where the Sconset Beach Preservation Fund gets access to the beach to work on their geotubes. Because I knew the waves from those storms had been beating against the bluff and the beach had lowered, so there would be things to see. It's beautiful. I mean, it's a place that you can't see this pretty much anywhere else in Massachusetts. So this is right near the beach club. You have sand up here, there's some sand and clay in here, and then this line here, these are shells. These are quahogs and soft shell clams, and it's what is known as a midden pile, and a midden pile is basically a trash heap. Native Americans were shelling the shellfish and throwing them into a pile, and it got covered up. And this is one of the things that got exposed. It's really neat. You can go there now and still see it. It's about, this section here is maybe 10, 15 feet long. Now this is part of Sankaty Bluff. And Sankaty is, like I said, there's layers exposed that you're not going to see anywhere else. There are 3 glacial or interglacial layers within this bank that aren't always exposed. This basement part is not always exposed, and like I said, the storm lowered it. But the layers are, the very top layer up here is the Wisconsin sediments from the last glacial stage pushed down over from Canada. But below that, before there was a coastal plain that was dry for the glacier to push down on, there was an ocean here. And these sediments here are sediments laid down in that ocean, and that period was the Sangamonian interglacial stage. That was between 75,000 and 125,000 years ago. The really dry, fine sediment here has shells in it, shell fragments from that time. And the sand is known as, with the shell fragments, it's known as Sankaty sand. But then there's this fine stuff that's so fine, like flour, that is called glacial flour. Really neat to go and check that out. I know that a bank with sediments, maybe you'd rather go to the beach or go to the chicken box or whatever your thing is. But for me, outdoors, to be able to see this is, I've written about it, and now you can see all the layers. And then down below here, this sort of basement layer of clay, and we'll see a little bit more of it, is the Illinoisan glacial stage. So then the glacier was here before this ocean was here, before this glacier was here, and that was 125,000 to 350,000 years ago. It's amazing. And the features, I probably took 300 photos. My dog's there for scale. So here's the clay. It's wild how you have this really dark gray, and then it's just sort of a distinct line up to the other stuff. I did it again. All right, thank you. So it almost looks like petrified wood, and this material here, I thought it was, iron, or I don't know. But it's clay. It's just really, really, really hard, these layers. It's still there. You can go see it. Go see it before somebody covers it up. Just really, really neat. You can see that now. Because come the summer, you get erosion in the wintertime. You get most of the really heavy erosion in the wintertime because storms are more severe. And then in the summertime, you get accretion. That's the beach building back up. This will eventually be covered and you won't see it. And then this is, I think, more of the Sangamonian. You can see these very fine layers of sediment here. I'd never seen this before, being exposed. Uh, okay, so now we're to the bibliography. This is the book I recommend you get. Unfortunately, Robert didn't put an index in his book, so it's hard to go through it and find the things you want. He and I talked on the phone a lot when I was writing my natural history book, and he would always say that he really wanted to do another edition so he could have an index. But either way, it's a great explainer if you ever wondered about the soils, about Nantucket, how it was formed. You know, it's 6 by 9. It's not very thick. You can get right through it. This is the Nantucket Shoreline Survey, an analysis of Nantucket shoreline erosion and accretion trends since 1846. It's a fascinating book and very easy reading. Little technical stuff, the stuff that I showed you, but it goes right around the island. It does, you know, Tom Nevers and Mattakasham and so on. It'll tell you how the erosion processes work in that area, how much erosion has been over time. And this book just came out. David Foster is the director of the Harvard Forest. It's a Harvard University sort of open air research area in Western Mass. And he wrote this book called A Meeting of Land and Sea, Nature and the Future of Martha's Vineyard. Now I know that it's the other islands, but don't let that throw you off because there is so much great information this book is about like that and very, very dense. I'm only on page like 57, and it was given to me by somebody who went on one of my guided hikes last year as part of the Nantucket Biodiversity Initiative conference. And there are so many, and they talk about Nantucket, they talk about the region. I was specifically interested in the Native Americans, but yes, it's all about the vineyard, but he is compelled to talk about the area, and so I'm learning a ton. One of the things that I'm learning, I'm still trying to wrap my head around, are these two words he uses in the very, very beginning of the book. Something to keep in mind as you explore the island. The words legacy and inertia. So for instance, legacy, the Marine Mammal Protection Act. The legacy of that is that now there are so many gray seals in the waters that fishermen are complaining about all the gray seals, and we gotta have studies and we gotta kill the seals. And inertia is the glacier pushing sand down here, and how that event is still going on. We're still feeling the effects of it. Keep those words in your mind as you walk around the island and explore it, and see if you can find examples. But this book, I guess it took them a couple decades to write it. It's fascinating, and it's very well written, easy to read. Lots of maps, lots of charts, lots of good explainers. You may even want to go to the vineyard after you read it. And then this is a really old one. I think it came out in 1965, Selected Resources of the Island Nantucket. It has some erosion stuff in it, but it also talks about the ponds. It talks about our animals. It's basically just sort of an inventory of Nantucket's natural world. And I got that on Amazon for a high price that I would have never paid for it now, but it was well worth it. I ended up buying a lot of books that I was repeatedly taking out at the library because it was just a pain to have to keep bringing them back. So I'm like, all right, I need this book, obviously, so I'll probably bought like 15 books that I really needed. And then, okay, this is just kind of a tribute. A friend of mine, he's no longer with us, his name is Neil Brosnan, he's a poet, and he would write poems about people and not tell them, and then through a friend pass them the poem. And so I got this as a birthday gift, maybe around 2007, 2008. And this is how he saw me. He says, walkabout man, 7-foot man, a naturalist in a sampan hat. I'm gonna get the part that I brought and put my glasses on and read it so that I don't screw it up. Okay. 7-foot man, naturalist in a sampan hat, scientific coolie, proficient in earth language, glacial till, terminal moraine, arteries and veins coursing through a complex island. No roustabout, no football player he, rather a long trail hiker, serene and contemplative, walking encyclopedia with an aboriginal approach to nature, dreamtime consciousness, following song lines, his walkabouts trail, collecting from the spirits of sea and sky and land, the outline of a heart, the template of his own overlays, aligned in understanding, the portent, the blessing of each refrain, music of constant flux, marking the path, passing it on. I was touched. Some somebody saw me, really saw who I was. I thought that was really cool. So I think that's it. Do we have questions? Thank you. We have time for questions. Yes, I am. Yep, my guide for Nantucket Walkabout, my business. Try to do it year-round. I've got some coming up. I might have one this weekend. So yeah, I am. Well, I did a story, like I said, for Nantucket Magazine that's going to come out in the springtime. And in doing that, I was trying to answer that question. And the story, I called the Provincetown Center for Coastal Studies and spoke with a coastal geologist there. And he says Nantucket loses 6 acres of upland to sea level rise a year. So that's, and there are some numbers in that shoreline survey as well that will answer that question. Oh, okay. I'm going to get that. Well, I'd say the beaches. I mean, there are people that rail against kids sliding down the dunes and ripping out the dune grass. But I would say that Squam Swamp, anywhere where the root systems are really exposed, anywhere where there's sphagnum moss, anywhere where you don't have a simple plant that just sinks roots into the ground and exists, but a plant that its roots are running along the ground, you have to define your own sensitivity. If you're someone who likes lichens, then anywhere that you could brush against and brush off lichens would be a sensitive area. But I would say that a lot of those swampy areas are extremely sensitive. Okay. All right. Maureen? Well, the sand moves down, east to west. And so, yes, that opened up, but then, everyone's like, oh my God, the storm blew all the sand in from the beach, but it really wasn't what happened. It opened up and the dunes went away, but the sand that's in there came down from the east and filled it in, and just, yes, it did get pushed into the creek. And I guess it depends on how full the creek gets, and maybe the creek will go up against that sand. I don't know. Each one of those, you've got Hither Creek there. Then if you go to Massachusetts Ave and look at Nantucket Harbor, then there's an indentation there at the dune. And if you look at Shaller's maps and several other maps that I've seen, that's called Broad Creek. And then you go up to Esther's Island to that inlet in between the beach and the island. That's called Narrow Creek. And on the other side of Esther's Island is another little inlet with another spit that comes along, and that inlet is called Further Creek. And Schaller said that those were all outwash valleys, like our outwash ponds. that have slowly shifted around. So I guess it depends on where the water is going to flow, is what I think. Sure. Thank you.
Round of applause for Peter. And thank you folks for coming out and joining us and filling these seats for our Food for Thought program. Peter will be signing books in the museum shop right through these glass doors. If you're interested in purchasing a book, he is selling his books and signing them, so just follow him right through there. And once again, just thank you for coming out. Enjoy the rest of your day.